this presentation is a follow-up, as Jonathan said, from what we talked about last time. So it's more of a practical application, and the easiest thing for me to do was take my family's business that I worked with and worked in for 25 years. So it gave a good example, I think, a good practical example of telling your story and how you tell your story. And Susan, I'm not sure if you're going to be going to the Tourism Industry Association conference end of November, beginning of December. It's in Ottawa. That might be an opportunity for you to just face-to-face drop in, or I think they do a virtual thing too. But there's a bunch of presenters that might have some value to what you're doing as well. Yeah, so thanks. Yeah, I'd recommend. And guys, as Jonathan said, if you want to jump in, if something comes up, what I'm doing here, I have a bunch of pictures and I'm going to talk my way through it. And then I'm hoping at the end, we all just have a chat and Jonathan will kind of force some conversation if he has to, or just moderate some conversation. So the recap I have here is pretty straightforward. This is what we talked about last time. And it's the critical part of telling your story. So a couple lines there. It's all about the clients. It's very hard for some folks that are in business. Now, I know this, to understand that you're not the hero. When you have a business, a lot of times you think the story's going to be about you, but it's really not. It's your clients. You have to listen to them. You use your experience. You pick up on all the knowledge that you've gained, but it's all about the clients, what they want, what they really want to do, why they're patronizing you, and what is their challenge. What's the reason why they're coming to you? Another point there that I talked about last week, and this is important too, is, and if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's taught us this: you got to get your head around change. You got to be flexible when you're telling your story. You have to understand it. I also find that becoming the guide, and I have down there literally and figuratively, is really important. So you want to be the guide. You want to guide people and let them know and understand that you're an expert. You're going to earn their trust that way. You want to help them figure out what they want and how you're going to provide it for them. And the other thing is, tell your story. When you're actually telling your story, you have to understand you are the expert of your story. You want to make sure people understand you're an expert, people realize you know your story the best, and your coworkers are experts in your story. So they know your story. You can't have people that are working alongside you who are telling a different story than you are. It's crucially important. And one of the last things is, which is often really challenging, especially when I'm talking with and over the years partnering with other businesses and other groups, you got to put in the work to make your story happen. There's a fair bit of work to this. Like, this is not just some people, oh, I can tell a great story. This is going to be all aspects of your marketing. It's going to be all aspects of your business. So you really got to do that. I have my screen sharing paused. Is that correct, John? Wait, now I'm going to say, no, I'm going to click it again. Resume.
There you go.
Can you see? Yeah, it just paused all of a sudden. Okay, so telling the story. This gets back to saying, the hero, the clients, your guests, whatever you want to call them in your particular industry. They're the protagonists in your story. They're the ones that are the stars. They're the ones that want to be front and center, whether they're holding the iceberg, whether they're looking at the lobster, whether they're having a great time. It's all about them. They are the stars. It's not about you. You have to realize that they are the heroes of your story. You have to listen to what your guests want. What do they really, really want? Listen to them. What do they like? And a really crucial thing is, what don't they like? So we would do various ways besides just conversations with our guests. We would also have opportunities for them to fill out forms and hit us up online and do different things, and lots of different feedback, even on our social media platforms, to find out what are they saying. What are they saying they really like? Or are they saying they don't? In our world, this is the stuff they liked. They loved this. They wanted to hang with the whales. That was a big thing for them. We heard that time and time again. It was excellent. They loved the icebergs. They loved being able to paddle up alongside, grab a piece of ice, see it floating by. They really loved that. They liked the caves and the arches and places we could bring them. They thought that was really cool. We went to places that they would never attempt to go because it looked too scary and too dangerous. They love waterfalls. We had a lot of waterfalls. Now, whether they want their picture in front of the waterfalls, or they felt comfortable going under the waterfalls with us, these were the things that came back continuously. And one of the also surprising things that came back, I guess it shouldn't have been surprising, was we designed our business this way because my father had been a teacher and everything had been very heavily very heavily in interpretation. So people really enjoyed, and we got a lot of feedback. It was like, hey, I expected the great waterfalls, I expected the whales, I expected really fun times, but I didn't expect I was going to learn so much. That's such a great part of your business, is that you take time to teach us. So these were the things they liked. And it's like, okay, that's our business. They also said, we don't like some of the things. And sometimes that's hard to hear that they don't like it. And what the guests, when it came down to, they didn't like losing time. Time is what we realized in the very first few years I was working with Dad, is people's biggest commodity. That's the most valuable thing they have. When my father started his business back in the late 60s, 70s, people would come to Newfoundland and they would spend a week with him. 10 years into the business, when I was working with Dad in the 90s, people didn't have a week, they didn't even have a day. We ended up going to half-day trips, and last going off 2.5 hour trips. People just don't have the time. So they had a very short period of time, and when they were on the water, they wanted to do the things they liked. They didn't want to, what they felt, taking time away from their adventure. They want to paddle through arches. They want to see whales. They want to do really cool things. So we said, okay, how can we do this? What way can we listen to these folks and make it happen? It wasn't easy for us to say, we might have to pivot a bit here. How do we pivot? How do we change our tours? How do we change it operationally so we can meet our customers' expectations and keep our story? So being flexible was crucial, and there was a lot of conversations about that. We were fortunate; we had an off season that we could spend weeks talking and being around and analyzing what people were saying, and we were going with that. And we realized, okay, we have to change some stuff. So our story that got flexible, and this is kind of a weird thing, but for the folks on the call, I would say everyone on the call besides me, in 1977, the CN Marine ferry called the William Carson, it sank off the coast, very close to Battle Harbor, if anyone knows where Battle Harbor is. It was the first run of the year, and the William Carson sank. No one died. It was they lost all their cargo, but everyone got out on the ice, as you can see, and they got in these lifeboats. So these lifeboats saved everyone. It was no big deal. I'm sure it was a really rough night on the ice, but that sailboat, that lifeboat, eventually from 1977 to about 25 years later, became our boat, and there it is right there. So we purchased that boat. We made some modifications to it, and we said, okay, this is what we're going to do to be flexible. If people are saying they want to spend more time hanging with the whales, they want to spend more time out there inside those big caves, they want to spend more time paddling alongside and looking at those icebergs, we got to find a way to make their time, because operation, we still got to get them back, because a 9:30 trip has to be back in time for the 12:30 trip, because we got a bunch of bodies going at 12:30, and there's another bunch of bodies going at 1, another bunch of bodies going at 2:30. So how do we operationally make this valuable? So we came up with this idea, okay, if people don't have enough time, yet they still want to do the whales, they still want to do the icebergs, they still want to do the caves and the waterfalls, how do we figure this out? How do we change our story? So we took our boat, we spent a lot of time, and I ended up personally getting very wet. We tried to figure out some way, hey, how do we get people out of these kayaks and into this motorboat so we can steam them back in and save time? So the maximum of their 2.5-hour tour, 2 hours and 15 minutes of it, are going to be out there hanging with the whales, under the cliffs, under the waterfalls, instead of having to spend 45 minutes to an hour paddling back. It was tricky. It was operationally tricky, and no one else in the world did it at that time. It was brand new. People had different types of ported trips, but nothing like this. So we spent a bit of time, and it took us a while to figure out, how do you tie the boats off? After you get people aboard, how do we tow them? How do you bring them back? How long should the ropes be? In what order should the boats be? How do we do this? So it was a lot of operational stuff to figure out. But what we did with it, once we got it down, it allowed people to do this. It allowed them to get out there, stay, and get their picture taken with whales, to sit there and watch the whales swim under the boat and spend an hour with the whales instead of spending 15 minutes. It allowed them to be very relaxed and calm as they went through arches or through caves and take their pictures and really enjoy themselves. It gave them that opportunity because they knew they were maximizing their time. If they want to see those icebergs, yeah, we could actually paddle that iceberg that blew away in the night and blew up to a cove a little bit further up the harbor. No problem, because you know what, guys, you're going to get aboard the boat and come back. There's no paddling back. That's the stuff we did. And we had a little soft launch. I felt super comfortable in the store, we had it kind of developed, and it immediately took off. People loved it. It gave them an opportunity to say, I'm maximizing my morning or I'm maximizing my afternoon. If I only have 3 hours to spend, this is what I'm going to do. It became our most expensive tour we offered, and it became our most popular tour. So it got to be up to a point where our story modified. It became like, yeah, we're doing kayak tours, but actually we're not. We're doing a kayak tour that also involves a motorboat tour. We called it a Go and Tow. That was just our fun little name. We called it a G&T, and it became extremely, extremely popular. And as I said, it beat out everything else we had. Not even close, like 3-1. And of course, we could charge more for it. And we realized this story was a story we were telling mostly to our guests from outside the province. A lot of our residents would take it as well, but some of our residents were a little bit more price sensitive, and they still want to go on the tour that was cheaper, around the same amount of time, and you would see a lot. You just wouldn't see as much. You wouldn't have the opportunity to do as much as you could on the Go and Tow. So it was our premium trip that we offered, and then that was our story. Our story became all about the Go and Tow, and actually, it was funny how that story took off, and even in the industry, in BC, in other places, people start doing a very, very similar thing. They start developing this idea of we can paddle out and do the tours and jump aboard a Zodiac or jump aboard something and come back in. So it became very, very interesting in how our story changed or modified. And it was really because we listened to our guests.
Stan,
yes.
There's a really cool question in here
Yep.
about, because this is something I think a lot of businesses need to think about around how do you have your plan B around your story? So Susan asked about what do you do in the rough weather? So if you have to cancel that out and you've got a group of 10 people from Ontario that had signed up with you and wanted this, did you guys have something in your back pocket that was delivered, or was it a cancellation?
It really depends, but yes, we did. So we offered kayaking tours and we offered coastal walking tours, and we used the East Coast Trail because it came right through our community. And we did our kayaking tours, and we had a variety of kayaking adventures. So the Go and Tow and the location where we were was a really wonderful spot. As you see some of those pictures, and those pictures were not taken on the best day of the summer. So we chose a location because it had a lot of interaction with whales. It had icebergs, it had amazing scenery, it had the caves, it had the waterfalls, it had all these things, but it was also very, very, very sheltered. And that's the main reason why we chose it. So we could get people out on many days where you wouldn't even dream of going out. And I've done a lot of paddling, and some days I wouldn't even went out with my friends who are paddlers. I could take everyone on this phone call out quite easily. And that was one of the reasons why we chose this harbor. There was about 15 different things we looked at criteria-wise to pick a location, because we were not actually from Cape Royal. We're from St. John's. It was about a 45-minute drive from where I lived. So we chose this community for that very reason, because of the harbor. If the weather, and in August was, as the days were the warmest, what happens in my part of the world is we have a lot of strong winds in August. So on days that it was wind-related cancellations, 7 times out of 10, we could still do a shorter paddle inside what we would call the inner harbor, and that would allow you to see waterfalls and caves and do a lot of interpretation and see stuff. Much more rarely would you have the whales inside this harbor. You could, but it was much more rare. And only on occasional years would you have icebergs. So we did an inner harbor tour. You still had a great time. So if the weather was really not great because of wind or sea conditions, we'd do that. And if they truly, if it came to a safety issue that we wouldn't take people out, there was an option of going for a walk if they wanted to. A lot of guests, of course, didn't mind going for a walk, but the guests had come because they knew our story. Our story was, we go out with Stan, we're going to go inside these incredible caves, we're going to see these amazing whales, and we're going to do all these really cool things. Probably only 20% of the guests said, I'll go for a walk and I'll have a great hike, spectacular views, I'll look down on the whales. So we did keep some of our business that way, but if we had to cancel because of weather, it was probably only 20% of the people that we picked up that we could convert into something else. Because it wasn't a motor, like we didn't offer a motorboat tour, like we didn't offer a boat tour as some of the other companies do. So that wasn't our business. Does that answer the question, Susan?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Okay. The last couple of slides I got, and this is pretty, it's really important, I think, in any story you're telling, no matter what you're doing or what you're about, is you really should be the expert. You want to become their guide. And in the last presentation I gave, I had some fun pictures of Yoda guiding Luke Skywalker, or Ben Obi-Wan guiding. People see themselves as Luke. People don't see themselves as Yoda. So you be the Yoda, you be their guide, you be their expert, you be the one that's teaching them whatever. I was lucky in my business. It was a physical aspect of it. I could literally, before we went, we established our credentials. We established that we're going to teach you how to paddle. We're going to teach you how to put on your PFD. We're going to teach you all these great things. We did it through humor and fun, but we very quickly established that, hey, you're not with a bunch of kids here who like to paddle and don't really know very much. You're with an expert, with people with lots of experience, lots of knowledge, some certification, some training, a lot of things behind this, and it's going to be fun. We did it on land. When we hit the water, we once again pushed that, hey, we're the experts. As you're sitting around getting ready to go for your paddle, you're going to hear a bunch of things that are going to teach you, give you confidence in your guides, give you confidence in where you're going to go. You're going to have a good time, and you're going to be safe. So that became a real big part of our story, that our guides were experts. And if at the start of the business, when I started in the early 90s with that, there really was no experts in kayaking. Kayaking was very, very new. We had, grown up doing a lot of canoeing. My father had done that, and we'd done paddling, but certification was almost next to nothing. You had to go to England to get certified, or to the West Coast of the United States. So we spent a lot of time getting certification and becoming known as experts. And then, of course, we had to train our guides. Most of the guides that showed up for us, especially in the first 5, 6, 8 years, had no kayaking experience. So we took a lot of time to train them. But the folks that would work with us, our coworkers, we made them experts, whether they were like taking pictures, whether they were showing people safe places, whether they were talking to guests. These folks were experts in marine biology. They were experts in geology. They were experts in other aspects of the tour. So right away, if you can be a guide, figuratively and literally, it's wonderful. Now, if you have a B&B, it's hard to be a literal guide, but you actually can show them around your property. You actually can take some time and explain things. If you have a hotel, whatever your business happens to be, I think it's really important to let people know they're dealing with an expert. That should be part of your story. If you can at all, it's a bit tricky. I know when people first start off, but I think if you can't be an expert, make sure the folks who work with you, they're really, really knowledgeable. So make sure they're expert interpreters, or they're expert historians, or what on that issue or that time period. It's really, really important. So they're the real key parts of getting your story out. On what we did it with humor too. That was a big part of our pitch. There's a couple of our guides choking out my father, who's driving a boat coming home on the go and tow, and we use that a lot. And we also live in a place that people expect that to be part of your story. A lot of our guests from Ontario and other parts of the country, they expect the Newfoundlanders to be funny and humorous, and that's what they expect. The Americans didn't, and the Europeans didn't, because they don't really understand our culture. But the crowd and our big market was from Ontario. They expected that. They liked it. They enjoyed it. They really liked that. Part of the story was going to be fun and humor, laugh. We're going to learn and have a great time. So we did that. I'm not saying that's something you got to do, because some folks, some businesses you're in, doesn't make sense. But that's what we did, and that really helped our story. And that's how we use that. Every time we told our story or had any type of marketing piece up or talked about our brand, it was always, we're going to have a pretty fun, good time coming out. And the last thing I'd throw at you guys is put in the work. You really got to spend time doing this. It's super important to put the time in. You got to spend the effort. You got to figure out. The key is it's a real big difference when you put your time in and you listen to what your guests have told you, and you realize, I'm going to deal with their challenge, what their big issue is. Then people listen. Then people get it. Then people know. Then your story has true value for them. So that's kind of a recap of last week and more of a practical. So Jonathan, I'm going to throw it to you if you want to, for all of us to have a chat about it, or where you want to go.